Red Bull's second defeat in 3 Formula 1 races was by far its worst performance of the season. It was comprehensively outgunned, with Max Verstappen managing only 6th place in the Monaco Grand Prix as Charles Leclerc claimed an emotional home victory for Ferrari. So was this limp Red Bull performance, compounded by Sergio Perez's big accident on the first lap, merely a one-off caused by the unique demands of the Monte Carlo circuit, or is there more to it than that? Well, while Verstappen admitted Monaco is the worst case scenario for Red Bull because of the track configuration, he was frustrated by Red Bull's failure to eliminate a long-term weakness that caused it big problems. He argues the chasing pack closing up means that Red Bull is now getting found out, and the car limitation that Monaco exposed will also hold back Red Bull at some other circuits. That's hugely encouraging for its rivals, particularly Ferrari and McLaren, as well as for those holding out hope for some sort of World Championship fight breaking out this year. So what has Red Bull got so wrong? To understand that, let's take an in-depth look at how the Monaco Grand Prix weekend played out. Red Bull hit trouble from the start of the Monaco weekend. During FP1, both Verstappen and teammate Sergio Perez complained about the poor ride of a car that was on a knife edge. That set the tone for the weekend. The car was poor over the bumps, didn't ride the curbs well, and Red Bull was unable to get it into a better window. While at Imola the week before, intense simulator work conducted by Sebastian Buemi after Friday struggles led to a vastly improved car, the RB20 could not be transformed in Monaco despite the best efforts of Liam Lawson, who was on sim duty for the event. What made Monaco so difficult is that no circuit has as many bumps, tricky curbs or camber variations. It's all down to how stiff the car needs to run. The RB20 works superbly aerodynamically thanks to running as close to the ground as possible to maximise underfloor downforce without hitting porpoising or bouncing problems. That's been the key to Red Bull's success under the ground effect regulations introduced in 2022. However, at a bumpy Monaco where a higher ride height is necessary, too stiff a car is bad news. But this car has to run stiff or the aerodynamic losses are enormous. And that's a problem Red Bull couldn't find a way out of. Red Bull worked relentlessly to improve the setup at Monaco, but it was to no avail. When the car was softened to be made more compliant, doing so came at the expense of rear grip that cost even more lap time. Therefore, the only answer was to live with the uncomfortable ride because softening off the car didn't work. As Verstappen said, Red Bull tried everything, but nothing made the car better. To make matters worse, while Red Bull knew there was a risk of this being a problem at Monaco, it didn't show up during preparatory simulator work. That is not in itself unusual. As Sauber head of trackside engineering Chevy Puigdemont said ahead of the weekend, simulating Monaco is not easy and the starting setup usually requires more fettling. The upshot was that Verstappen and Perez both struggled in qualifying. For Perez, it was a disaster as he was eliminated in Q1 for the first time this season after lapping 3.5 tenths slower than Verstappen. Verstappen made it to Q3 easily and would likely have qualified second or third, but the rear stepped out at Sandoval on his final attempt and he brushed the wall. As a result, he had to abort the lap and was shuffled down to 6th. The problems had a lot in common with Red Bull's Singapore 2023 struggles. There the car struggled badly on the bumps, although it was exacerbated by not optimising the setup. At Monaco, Red Bull did optimise the car, it was simply that the ride limitation was impossible to eliminate, and that's what's worrying Verstappen. He called it a fundamental problem that might not be fixed quickly. While Verstappen felt confident in the car in the medium and faster corners, in the slow bumpy turns where curb use is vital, the Red Bull struggled. In particular, he pointed to the hairpin and the chicane as significant time losses, with the Red Bull at its most competitive in Sector 1, losing more than a quarter of a second in Sector 2 and slipping to 6th fastest in the tight confines of the final sector. And as Verstappen pointed out, there are other circuits coming up that are bumpy and require aggressive curb riding, including the next round of the championship in Canada and, most worryingly for Red Bull, Singapore. With the rest closing up, this weakness is a real concern for Red Bull. It may be that as this is an extreme outlier in terms of circuit characteristics, it's just a necessary weakness for the best possible average performance over the season. But with Verstappen pushing hard for improvements, team principal Christian Horner suggested it was about tackling this weakness with next year's RB21. Red Bull has carried this weakness since 2022, it's just that the advantage it had over the rest meant all it did was reduce its dominance and it wasn't exposed. If you have an advantage that, in particular in race conditions, is usually half a second a lap, and you hit a track where you are 2 or 3 tenths worse off, that just makes the difference between winning by a mile and still winning comfortably. But now, McLaren and Ferrari in particular are closer, it's enough to make the difference between victory and defeat. That's why Red Bull has gone from almost winning every race last year and expectations it would do the same this year to having more of a fight on its hands. And that's why Verstappen, who has been well aware of this weakness and pushed hard for it to be fixed, is so frustrated. While Red Bull struggled, Ferrari and in particular Charles Leclerc utterly dominated. He won from pole position, becoming the first Monegasque to win his home Grand Prix since Louis Chiron 93 years ago. The Ferrari was a stark contrast to the Red Bull, working well over the bumps and allowing Leclerc to attack the corners with confidence. While teammate Carlos Sainz admitted he wasn't able to match that confidence, the Ferrari was unquestionably the strongest car. From pole position, Leclerc had a straightforward race after holding the lead at the start, but he wasn't getting carried away with beating Red Bull. He still believes Red Bull has the strongest car overall, it just wasn't around Monaco. But Ferrari is getting closer. It has, on average, the second fastest car this season and is Red Bull's closest rival in the Constructors' Championship. That's thanks to big improvements that make the car far less peaky than last year. Red Bull has been defeated before in 2024, but when Carlos Sainz won in Australia, it was after Verstappen hit braking problems that forced the Red Bull out. And in Miami, it was thanks to a combination of the safety car that gave Lando Norris the lead and Verstappen suffering pace-sapping damage when he cut the chicane and hit a cone. But at Monaco, Red Bull was straight up defeated on pace, proving that it's beatable in a fair fight. Buoyed by the recent Miami upgrade package that meant it was also strong at Imola, McLaren was well in the mix at Monaco, although this time it was Oscar Piastri who led the charge. He could potentially even have been on pole position and therefore well placed to win, given his ideal lap in Monaco qualifying was 7/100ths faster than Leclerc. That continued a strong recent run of form that Norris describes as a very good sign. The McLaren is well known as a car that thrives in faster corners but with a significant slow speed weakness, especially in longer turns. But as team principal Andrea Stella says, recent upgrades have unexpectedly improved the car in such corners. Stella had previously talked of taking another year at least to eliminate its slow corner weakness, but the progress made suggests that McLaren can be more of a consistent threat than exclusively on tracks with plenty of medium and high speed corners. For once, Mercedes was also a threat at Monaco, with George Russell out qualifying and beating Red Bull. Mercedes is making steady progress with a series of upgrades, most recently a new front wing only Russell ran in Monaco, as there was only one example of it available and Lewis Hamilton didn't want to risk it. This represents a move away from the design trick it started the season with, whereby the top flap of the front wing close to the nose was done away with to improve the airflow to the front of the floor. It's another unique Mercedes design that is being moved away from. As trackside engineering director Andrew Chauvelin said, it worked well and will be on both cars for the next race in Canada. Mercedes is still a step behind the leading three teams, but has a flurry of upgrades planned, and it wouldn't take much for it to be in among the frontrunners more consistently. However, it's clear the low-speed Monaco characteristics helped to mask the weaknesses of the car. After all, the key problem Mercedes must fix is being able to run the car so that it performs well across a wide range of corner speeds, something technical director James Allison hopes will be solved by the summer break, but that was far less of a problem at tight and twisty Monaco. Red Bull still has the best car, but now that its performance advantage has been cut into, it's clear it will be more vulnerable to defeats in the future. While Monaco was an extreme in terms of track characteristics and Verstappen could and should have been on the podium, even if winning was beyond Red Bull, the trend is clear. As chief engineer Paul Monaghan said at the start of the Monaco weekend, the field is converging and the others are on us. In particular, the fact that McLaren and Ferrari are close, with their own varying strengths and weaknesses, means that there's a chance one or the other will be a threat on any given weekend, even though the Red Bull will still likely have the edge on conventional circuits. That's why it's all about the development war, which is an area where Red Bull has a disadvantage thanks to having the least wind tunnel time and CFD items because of F1's aerodynamic testing regulations. Verstappen and Red Bull are clear favourites for the championship and to win going into most race weekends. But recent races have proved it's got a battle on its hands to remain on top, and that's great news for all of us who want to see Ferrari, McLaren, Red Bull, and in future perhaps even Mercedes, battling it out at the front every weekend. The Red Bull isn't going to be, as Verstappen put it, bouncing like a kangaroo every weekend, and there will be plenty more wins to come in 2024. But the chasing pack is clearly getting closer, and as Monaco showed, in certain circumstances, they can even be ahead.